Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm sitting with Bob Lindquist of Lindquist Family and Verdad Wines. We are in the Arroyo Grande in the slow coast of California. Bob, welcome, and tell us about Lindquist Wines and Lindquist Family and Verdad Wines.
Well, sure. I've actually been making wine for quite a long time here on the Central Coast since 1982. First with the label that I started called Coupe in 1982, which was sold at the end of 2018, and that's when I started Lindquist Family Wines. My wife Louisa makes Verdad wines. She started that brand in 2000. Her focus is on Iberian varietals, mostly Albarino and Tempranillo. And my focus for Lindquist is the same as it was for Coupe, which is Rhone varietals, and then Chardonnay from the Bien Nacido Vineyard.
And so, do you own any vineyards? I know you have owned vineyards in the past, but do you currently own any, or where are you sourcing your grapes from?
Right. We did own a vineyard up here in the Edna Valley, which is one of the reasons we moved up to this area in 2003. We purchased an 80-acre ranch in the Edna Valley and planted 40 acres in 2005. And when we bought it, we really stretched ourselves thin to buy it. It was kind of out of our price range, but we made it happen. And my philosophy then was, it's coastal California real estate. What could possibly go wrong? And in 2008, when the housing market dove and the recession happened, we found out what could actually go wrong with that concept. And so we ended up in 2013 selling it to a man named Brooke Williams, who continued to farm. We had farmed it biodynamically from day one, and part of the agreement with Brooke was that we would continue to get the lion's share of the grapes from the vineyard, and that he would continue farming it biodynamically, which he did up until last year, and then Brooke sold the vineyard to another winery, and we're no longer working with that vineyard as of last year.
Oh.
Yeah.
So where are you sourcing fruit from? What areas and any, how many different vineyards do you work with today?
Quite a few, all in mostly here in the kind of cool climate areas of the Central Coast. So Santa Ynez Valley, Alisos Canyon, Santa Rita Hills, Santa Maria Valley, which is probably our most important for Lindquist Family, with the Bien Nacido Vineyard where the winery is located, and then quite a few grapes from the Edna Valley, especially for the Verdad brand. All of Louisa's Albarino, or most of it, comes from the Edna Valley.
And for Lindquist Family Wines, what's your total case production?
About 2,500 cases for Lindquist and about 2,500 cases for Verdad, roughly, depending on yields.
Yeah,
and,
so a nice 5,000 even for the whole family business.
Right. Yeah.
And our
plan is to grow that a little bit over the next few years, depending on the market. We obviously had the same setback that a lot of wineries had during the pandemic with production. We're kind of ramping back up again post-pandemic.
Well, yeah, knock on wood. But on that, with markets, where are your wines available? Are they in the market in different states? Are you direct to consumer only?
We sell about 25 to 30% direct to consumer, and then the rest is sold through kind of traditional 3-tier distribution channels. We're in, California is our largest market, but we're in, about 8 out-of-state markets, and currently 1 or actually 2 export markets. We just started selling wine in Singapore, but with Coupe, we had a lot of contacts with distributors and with importers, and we would probably be even a little bit more aggressive in that arena if it hadn't been for the pandemic.
Right.
A lot of when restaurants stopped buying wine and so forth, a lot of distributors had to kind of refocus, and so it's been some time coming back from that.
Yeah, and sort of a shift in the model of selling wine.
Right.
So now that we've got the basics out of the way, I'm curious what your first memory relevant to wine is. Like you as a wine person, or even what is your first memory?
With good wine or with wine in general?
With wine in general.
Well,
good wine.
well, they're two different things,
right.
In high school and college, we at parties we would have, wine like Red Mountain Burgundy, and what was the other one that we Annie Green Springs and Boone's Farm, things like this.
I know that one.
Yeah. I mean, those were the kind of things that, and then I eventually graduated to things like Blue Nun and Lancers and Matus. But it wasn't until 1975 I was working for this was post-college, working for a small advertising company in Orange County, and one of our clients was a wine shop. And I did some work for the guy who owned the wine shop, and he owed me $50, and he said, "Do you mind if I pay you in wine?" And I said, "I like wine, sure, yeah, that sounds good." So I took home some wines that were, $8 to $10 a bottle, which prior to that my budget was $2 or $3 a bottle for a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
And that first night I opened one of them and clearly remember exactly what it was. It was a 1970 Simi Cabernet Sauvignon. And it blew my mind. It was like, I didn't know wine could be this good.
Wow.
and that was my light bulb moment, if you will. And I never looked back after that, tasting that wine.
Yeah. Well, I usually segue into a question of asking you, with all the wines you drink, one of those aha moments. Clearly, that was your first aha moment. But in your illustrious career of all the wines you've gotten to drink and the travels you've had, has there been another aha moment, another memorable wine that kind of stands out as a marker somewhere along the path, or just as it was the time and place and people you were with that always stands out?
Yeah, no, and if I had to pick one additional aha moment, it would be tasting wines that were imported by the importer Kermit Lynch. When I was working at Zaca Mesa Winery, I'm kind of skipping around a little bit here, but this was before I started Coupe. I paid a visit to Kermit's store, and he turned me on to the great wines of the Rhone, and that's what really
set you on your path.
Literally. If it hadn't been for that, I don't know if I would have pursued Rhone varietals. Maybe I would have, but who knows? Fate is a funny thing that way. It's just like that wine shop owner, giving me wine instead of money. If that hadn't happened, I don't know maybe I'd still be in the advertising business. I don't know. But anyway, so that would be the other kind of turning point, I would say, of my wine career was tasting wines from the Rhone that really turned me on.
So if we were to come to your home, into your wine cellar, what would we find there? Is it predominantly Rhone and some local wines, or would we be surprised by anything else we find in there?
I'm a wine geek. I grew up a wine geek. My wife, Louisa's a wine geek. So we love wines from all over. You wouldn't find a lot of Bordeaux, but you'd find some Bordeaux. But you'd find a lot of Rhone, a lot of Spanish, a lot of Italian, some German, not as much as we should have of German, because it seems like whenever we buy German, we drink them. And then Burgundy. We love Burgundy and wines from the south of France. So we buy wines from all over. We don't have we don't buy South American wines. We enjoy them when we have them. Mm-hmm. We don't really buy Australian or New Zealand wines, but we enjoy them when we have them. But we have a fair amount of California wine in our cellar, dating back to the wines from the 70s and 80s, when I first started collecting wine. So
wow, there are, I'm sure, a lot of gems in your cellar, and I'm wondering, is there something you opened recently that drank really well? Is there? Last night, the night before, I don't know.
Sorry, I've got a little frog in my throat. Let me just take a little sip of water here.
No problem.
It was late night, watching the memorials for Vin Scully last night, and so I'm moving a little slow this morning because of that. But one of the wines that I had recently that was just incredible was a 2002 Chave Hermitage Rouge. 2002 was not a great vintage in the Northern Rhone, but it showed what a great winemaker can do in a kind of off vintage, a vintage that the press kind of poo-pooed. Yeah, exactly. And it was just so elegant and pure, and just spoke of Hermitage in the kind of elegant sense that older Hermitage often displayed. More Hermitage because of climate change. More and more Hermitage and Northern Rhones are getting bigger and more powerful, kind of as the decades get warmer.
Right.
So that would be something that I had recently that really lit me up. Yeah.
Can never discount those, bashed vintages. They sometimes surprise you.
That's right. Yeah.
So with all the wines you drink from around the world and all the grapes you work with, do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Pinot Noir. Yeah. I think that, when you have the greatest Pinot Noirs, there's something that is kind of unmatched about it. I love Syrah, and that's what I make, and that's kind of what I hang my hat on. But I'd have to say the greatest wines I've ever had in my life have been great Burgundies, and so that would. Is that the right answer?
Sure. There's no right answer.
Well, but did you want me to expand on that?
No, I think that's great. I think that there is, in that way, it's perfection. The final product, the closest to perfection is a beautiful Burgundy. Perfection is one of those elusive things that people aspire to. And in line with that, a lot of people aspire to scores. Whether it's how people buy wine and they want to buy high scores, or as a winemaker, I'm curious what your take is on wine critics and scores. How do you view them in the industry, and how do you view them for a brand like yours, both in the past and as well as currently?
Well, we tend to make elegant, balanced wines. That's kind of our style, kind of more in the European mold, if you will, rather than the kind of big, powerful, California style. And it's usually the bigger wines that get the higher scores. We always enjoy it when we get a nice score,
right,
but we don't really pursue them. That said, we do send our wines to most wine critics to sample, and they score them, and when we get a good score, we put it out to our distributors because it does help sell wine, and we put it on our website and so forth. So we're not purists about the process, but if I had my way, I wouldn't care about it at all. But the part of this business is not only making wine but selling wine.
Absolutely.
And having pull through in the marketplace. You don't want to just sell a wine to a customer and have it sit on the shelf. So it does help sell wine, and so from that standpoint, and there are many critics who have great palates, and there's many critics who I don't agree with their palates, but that's what makes the world go round, right?
Right, and I guess we each have to find the ones that work for us in buying wine, or just taste a lot of wine.
Right.
So I'm curious, as a wine drinker, obviously you make everything, but if you had to choose, or would you choose red, white, or rosé?
Red wine, yeah. Although that's how can you live without great white wine?
True.
Yeah. And I obviously I love rosé, but great Chardonnay or Riesling, are some of the greatest wines of the world as well. So it's hard to. But if I had to pick one, actually, if I had to pick one, it might be champagne because.
Well, I was going to say then still or sparkling, but champagne, just jumps up there. I know everyone. Yeah, if you were stuck drinking great champagne every day, wouldn't be the worst thing.
That wouldn't be the worst thing. If I was stuck drinking red wine every day, what if it's too warm? It's just not right. Yeah.
Right. Well, so speaking about drinking every day, if you had the same thing, like how do you approach when it comes to food and wine? You obviously don't want to drink the same wine every single day with every single meal. Do you feel that there are the good old rules of white wine and fish and red wine and meat that you follow? Do you approach it in a different way? Are there rules, or do you not really care? It's just what you want.
Well, I think that certain wines go better with certain foods. So, we're a little bit old school that way. So we do try to match up flavors with what we're having. There's not that you can't drink red wine with fish. But, in fact, let's say grilled salmon, for instance, we would always tend to go for like either a Beaujolais or a Pinot Noir, a lighter style of Pinot Noir, to go with something like that, where, of course, you could also have a white wine. So, but, if you're having, meat or lamb or, something like that, we would not have Chardonnay with that, or Riesling, it's just, we're a little bit traditional that way. And, I think that people should drink what they like with what they like, but there are certain things that go better with certain foods. It's just it's just kind of one of those things that is old as wine and food is.
That's right. Someone else has tested out that
right.
Oysters and Cabernet don't work, so you don't need to do it.
The Europeans have got that down, and we need to learn from them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm curious, for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure to taste your wine, you were talking about how you make elegant wines. What do you think they're missing out on by not having tasted your wines yet? I'm sure they will after listening to this.
Well, elegance and balance is something that we strive for, and I think that most wine drinkers end up getting to that point. Not all wine drinkers do. When I was a young wine drinker, I was impressed by power in wines, and as my palate matured, I appreciated more and more elegance, nuance, just tasting, the sense of place rather than the sense of power that the winemaker imposed on the wine. So I think that's what a consumer would look for in our wines, and always the wines that we make are wines that match well with foods, because they're not big, powerful, high alcohol wines. They have good acidity, and that's a benefit of growing the grapes here on the cool Central Coast. We retain good acidity, low pH, important factors in making balanced styles.
Yeah, we're very close to the ocean, so
we're literally 2 miles right here, and most of the vineyards, in the slow coast, the new. What they really want us to call it, the San Luis Obispo coast.
It's a lot of words.
It's a lot of words, exactly. But it's an important new AVA in this area, because so many fine coastal vineyards in San Luis Obispo County didn't have their own AVA. There was the Edna Valley and the Arroyo Grande Valley, and then of course there's Paso Robles, which is a whole different ball game. It's quite a bit warmer, and that's still part of San Luis Obispo County. So this new appellation really kind of defines the area.
It's all about the ocean. So we love that. So if aliens were to come land on the beach right now and they came into your tasting room, and which of your wines would you want to welcome them with to say, this is Lindquist family wines?
Wow. Well, I guess it would be my Central Coast Syrah, because that's something I've been making continuously since 1982, and it's even though it's a blend of different vineyards from both San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties, it speaks of these kind of coastal climates. And it's something that is readily available, something that we make a fair amount of. Even under the Lindquist label, when I was making the Coupe Central Coast Syrah, at our high point, we were making about 20,000 cases a year. Now under the Lindquist label, we make about 1,000 cases a year of the Central Coast Syrah. So we can be a lot more particular, with the vineyards and the grapes that go into that blend, and it's a trademark wine for us, I guess.
Right.
would be a good term.
I have drunk quite a bit of Coupe Central Coast Syrah in my time, so I'm quite familiar with it. You've been in this industry for a long time and been in the same area, and I'm wondering how you see vintages in California, in the Central Coast. We know every vintage tells a different story, and I don't pretend that they're exact. But do you tend to see more nuanced difference? Do you see greater differences? Do you see commonalities? What have you seen over the years being in this area?
Well, My first vintage on the Central Coast was 1979 when I worked at Zaca Mesa. So I now have, what's that, 43, 44 vintages of experience, and we've never had a bad vintage on the Central Coast, which tells you something about the consistency of our weather. There are vintages that are better than others. There are vintages that aren't as good as others because of weather factors. Normally it's a heat wave that causes more problems than anything else because we are in a cool area. So when a heat wave comes along, it
shocks
really,
everything.
yeah, it really does. It's rarely rain, although there have been vintages where it's rain. But because we don't get much rain here during the growing season, that's usually never a big factor. So I think that we pretty much have good vintages every year. I mean, it's really, and I'm not just saying that. It's actually true.
I love it. I mean, it makes sense. So when you're in the vineyard and prepping for a vintage, or going through a season, are there any signs or predictors that you look for that are going to tell you what this season's going to give you? I mean, you have a good sense you're going to be okay, but are there things that are going to say to you, this is going to be a great one?
It's all about the weather. It really is. We tend to prefer, because we make elegant, balanced styles of wine, we tend to prefer the cool vintages as long as we get to, the right ripeness without rain coming along or, a heat wave coming along to change the trajectory of the ripening curve. So we just look for good weather during flowering, which is really a kind of a critical thing here on the Central Coast. We get a lot of wind in May and early June, and that's the flowering period. So we look for good weather during that period, and then we look for good weather during veraison, which is when the grapes start to turn and soften and color and so forth.
And that's usually August?
Usually August, yeah. At the end of July this year, some of the Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris was starting to variate a little bit, which is not uncommon as well. And then of course the weather during harvest is the most critical period during September, October. Because of the different varieties that we make, we make everything from Pinot Noir, which ripens early, and in our winery, which we share with Au Bon Climat, they make Pinot Gris, which ripens even earlier than Pinot Noir. So that's kind of what we generally start with. And then Au Bon Climat also makes a Pinot from Russian River, which is a little bit warmer. So that's almost always the first grapes that come in, followed by the Pinot Gris from the Santa Maria Valley, etc. And then we end up the harvest around, and anyway, so that's end of August, early September, when those early grapes ripen. And then the latest grapes that we have are Syrah, Grenache, and Roussanne. And those could ripen in the end of October, sometimes into November. The latest I've ever harvested was November 17th.
Wow.
So it's a long harvest. And what kind of sets this area apart, and I'm kind of giving a long answer to your question,
great.
but what really sets this area apart is the climate. We have this long, cool summer that allows early ripening varieties like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, etc., Albarino, Viognier. I'm just naming some of the early ripening. It allows them to have this long, cool, even ripening period during June, July, August. And then some of our best weather, some of the nicest weather that we have is September and October. It has to do with when it's hot inland in the summertime, it brings in the ocean. So we get a lot of ocean influence during June, July, and August. And then in September and October, when it starts to cool down inland, we get more high pressure on the coast. And so we get warmer, sunnier days, still really cool nights. But so it allows these later ripening varieties, like Grenache, for instance, to ripen as well, even though it's maybe 8 to 10 weeks after the first Pinot Gris or Pinot Noir came in.
Yeah, so this long growing season, and then not being met with, like you were saying before, about sort of the perfection of this area, that you never have a bad vintage. You don't have to worry about, crazy frost or snow or rain coming in to ruin it.
Right.
So In all the years that you've been doing this, have you set up any rituals that you do, good luck rituals at the start of harvest or, start of making wine?
We always have some great wine. One of our traditions that the winery that Jim Clendenin and I built together is we have a staff lunch every day. And when Jim was with us, he would cook, and now that he's not with us, our cellar master Enrique cooks, and other people cook once in a while as well. But,
you don't cook?
Once in a while, but rarely. Usually when it's up to me, it's everybody goes, hey, it's sandwich day, because I bring in a bunch of bread and cold cuts and cheese and so forth, and everybody makes their own sandwiches. But we also have a tradition of always having wine with lunch, and if we have guests coming to the winery, we're not open to the public, but we get guests, within the industry, distributors, writers, whatever, who often come through. We'll show them our wines, and then if we don't have any guests, we're usually drinking somebody else's wines to help kind of learn. But anyways, getting back to your the ritual question, whenever the harvest starts, we almost always have a bottle of champagne chilled, ready to pop the cork, and then that day's lunch we'll pull out some great wines out of the cellar, whether it be our wines or other people's wines. But that's always an important tradition.
Not a bad place to work harvest.
That's right.
So I know you don't own any vineyards now, but you obviously spend time in the vineyards where you're sourcing fruit. But in the years that you owned vineyards as well, what did you ever find yourself walking through the vineyard and talking to your vines? What kind of relationship did you have with them? Or even in the cellar with your wines, is there a communication that happens, or do you think that's all kind of silly talk?
That's kind of silly talk. That said, the vineyard that we planted here in the Edna Valley that was biodynamically farmed, one of the tenets of biodynamic farming is to really get to know your vines. That's one of the most important factors in understanding biodynamics and the vineyard and what the vineyard's giving you and so forth. Walking the vineyard, looking what the vines need, and that's an important part of it, but definitely don't talk to them.
So I'm curious, I know you worked in advertising prior to getting into wine, but when you were a little boy, what did you want to be when you grew up? Maybe post-superhero phase, but
Yeah. I mean, my dad was an engineer that worked for McDonnell Douglas, first Douglas aircraft, and I was always fascinated by rockets and airplanes and so forth. That was one of the things that and then I've always been a baseball fan, so I kind of fantasized, various times about being a baseball player or doing something in baseball, which I kind of think if I hadn't found wine, I think that might have been the direction I would have gone, would to try to find something in baseball. I wasn't good enough as a player to make it that way, but
you would have found something.
Something, yeah.
Well, I'm curious. I know you're a huge Dodgers fan, and when your team wins, because they're very good, when your team wins, which of your wines would you want to give them to celebrate, to toast their championship?
It's funny you ask that, because the last time that the Dodgers won a world championship was 1988 until 2020. Mm-hmm. And one of the wines that I opened when we won the 2020 championship, in fact, I opened several,
I'm sure.
1988s. Wines that I'd made and wines that I had in my cellar from other friends and producers. So that was kind of a theme that ran through, because 88s are ready to drink. And so it was kind of a fun segue, if you will.
I like that.
Yeah.
And what would you give the team to celebrate of your wines? Because you're not going to give them your 88s.
That's right. I don't have enough of that to go around anymore. I'd have to, I'd give them something current, but one of my best wines, like maybe our Syrah from Bien Nacido Vineyard.
Okay. So when you're not working, how do you like to spend your free time?
We like to travel. We like to cook.
More than sandwiches?
More than sandwiches. We cook at home. The intimidating thing about cooking at the winery is you're cooking for 12 to 15 people without guests. And then if we have guests, there's so to cook for that many people takes a lot of time.
Yes.
When we're just cooking at home for the two of us or the three of us or the four of us, depending on what family is around, then it's a different thing. So we like to do that. We like to hike. We like to swim. We used to ski, but then our youngest son didn't like skiing. So when he came along, we kind of slowly got out of going on ski trips. But that was something we used to do that we really enjoyed, but not anymore.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
So now that you're, to a degree, empty nesters, when you're planning a romantic evening for you and Louisa, what sort of wines would be opened? I mean, you're a Rhone guy. She's a Spanish grape girl. Like, what wines make for a romantic evening between the two of you?
Well, always champagne.
Of course.
Yeah, no, always champagne, and we love champagne and caviar. We have a favorite American caviar substitute that we order, at least 3, 4, 5 times a year from a company called Kelly's Catch, which I always like to give them a plug when I can. That's Kelly's with a K and then Catch with a K. You can look them up online, but their paddlefish roe gives caviar a run for its money at about at a fraction of the price.
We'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's really, really good stuff. So that would be something that we would like to start with.
Yeah, that sounds like a good start.
Yeah.
Good start. So when you look back at your career, I mean, you've had an illustrious career in the wine industry, and a career even prior. What would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
Wow. Well, I think establishing a business from scratch, the Coupe Winery. I started that pretty much by myself with borrowed money, $35,000, and built it up into what ended up being a 35,000 case winery by the time it was sold in 2018. So that was obviously so that building up that business allowed us to have a nice life. You don't get wealthy in this business unless you're Jess Jackson or Robert Mondavi or one of the Wagners. Yeah. I mean, there are people that do really well financially, but that's really not why I got into it. But still, you have to make a living, and you want to be able to afford to live here on the Central Coast. So that kind of allowed us to do that, and provide for my family, and so I guess that would be it.
That's a great achievement. I mean, building a successful business, and then selling it too, because that's the fruition of the circle.
Sure. Yeah.
In life, we're given a lot of advice from when we're children, and our parents and teachers through our careers with mentors and friends. And I'm wondering if there's a piece of advice that you got that is something you carry with you in how you look at the world or how you approach work.
Well, my mother, who was one of the nicest people I ever knew, always said, be nice to people, even if you don't want to be. That's, and I think that's an important thing that I've always carried. I mean, there are occasions when I'm not nice to somebody, but it's rare. And then one of the most important things in winemaking, I like to attribute to Jim Clendenin, who was my mentor at Zaca Mesa. He was my boss when I started working there and learning to make wine. He taught me how to make wine. He said, top your barrels like your life depends on it. It's like, okay. and that was actually advice that he had kind of learned in Burgundy, how important it is to keep your barrels topped. It may seem like a stupid little thing that, of course you do that, but you'd be surprised how many wineries neglect topping. I mean, they do top, of course.
Right. But they don't top like their wife depends on it.
Exactly. So that's a really important thing.
Ah.
Yeah.
So complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
Well, it's not a complete meal. A table with good food on it needs good wine. So it's not a complete meal without wine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, so we're sitting at a table with a complete meal. Your wine is on the table, but there's an extra seat next to you. And I'm curious, if you could have anyone from any walk of life, living or deceased, that you'd want to share a bottle of your wine with, who would that be?
Well, you're answering that question on a day when I can easily answer it, and that would be Vin Scully.
I had a feeling I knew that already. We're almost finished, so I have two more quick questions for you, and then the final. First thing is, you're on your 43rd, you said?
43rd or 44th? Well, we just celebrated our 40th anniversary. I started Cupé in 1982. So 2021 was our 40th vintage. 2022 is obviously the calendar 40-year celebration. And then prior to that, I worked, 4 vintages at Zaca Mesa before starting Cupé.
So how do you see, we know climate change is an issue. You think we'll be drinking wine in 300 years?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I don't know where it'll be from. But, wine is it's a beverage that kind of makes itself in a way. Ancient peoples figured out that fermented fruit and fermented grapes especially made something that they enjoyed, and then they refined it over the millennia, and I think we've learned enough. Unless climate change just obliterates the growing conditions worldwide, but I think there's always going to be places where wine grapes can grow and make fine wine. I would sure hope so. I'd hate to think that they wouldn't.
Well, if God forbid that wasn't the case and you were left on a deserted island, what 3 wines would you want to have on that island with you?
Well, Champagne, Burgundy, and Riesling. Those 3.
That was so easy. Wow.
Well, and I love Chardonnay as much as I love Riesling, but because I have Burgundy, I think I'd rather have some Riesling for my white choice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love it. So we're at that point at the end where we play our little game of pairing wine and food, and wine and music. Sorry, where's my mind? And I'm curious, just looking at some of the wines that we spoke about of yours, if you could just tell me. I know you're a huge music fan, so this should also be pretty easy for you. But you spoke about the wine you would give to the aliens. You're very, your Central Coast Syrah, the one you've been making the longest. What kind of music does that conjure up for you?
Well, I always think of the Kinks first, because the Kinks, there was another twist of fate. My going to a Kinks concert in 1979, I got fired from the job in a retail wine store that I was working. It was owned by the son of the owner of Zaca Mesa. And long story, but I'll keep it short for our purposes here. But I got fired by the son, and then hired that same afternoon by the father his father to work at Zaca Mesa, and so that was a Kinks concert that facilitated that whole thing happening. So I always have given credit to the Kinks, and besides that, I love the Kinks. I love the British invasion music of the '60s, and
absolutely.
So that would be
the music for that. What about your Bien Nacido Syrah? More a specific vineyard.
Well, the harmonies of the Beach Boys. Growing up in Southern California, when you make Syrah in cool climate like Bien Nacido, the harmonies that are created by the balance and structure that you get from cool climate is very different and unique, and I love the Beach Boys and their harmonies, kind of endless harmonies. They're just an amazing amazing musicians, and particularly their main songwriter Brian Wilson.
Absolutely. Trying to think of one more. What about the white wine right in front of us up there? What bottle is that?
The Viognier.
The Viognier.
On the top.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So what about your Viognier?
Well, I guess because I've already mentioned the Kinks and the Beach Boys, I have to go Beatles. because they were
more English invasion, although the Beach Boys aren't. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Beatles were the bellwether for, I was. What was I in 1964? I had just turned 11 years old when the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I watched that show, and I became an instant Beatle and rock and roll and British Invasion fan, and continue to this day. I still listen to the Beatles and the Beach Boys and the Kinks. So, without the Beatles, the Kinks and the Beach Boys might not have been quite as great as they were.
Well, so if the Viognier gets the Beatles, what does your rosé get?
Well, Louisa makes the rosé.
Okay.
Yeah, and she is Rolling Stones. So we have that argument all the time. Is it the Beatles or the Stones? And I always go Beatles, and she always goes Stones. And there's no right or wrong answer to that, because the Stones are amazing and obviously have endured much longer than the Beatles have.
Not by the Beatles' fault, of course.
Right. So because she makes the rosé, I'm going to plug the Rolling Stones.
We've hit all the major bands of the 60s and 70s. That's awesome. So, okay, last question it's a two-part question. The first is, you've traveled the world, and you said that you and Louisa love to travel. But I'm wondering if there's one wine region at the top of your bucket list for your next travel. Where do you really want to go and explore?
Piemonte. We've never been to Piemonte, so that's, I've been to the Mosel and the Rheingau, but Louisa has not. So I guess that would be the other place, besides Piemonte that we'd like to explore.
Well, you should get on that now that travel's back. Get up there, it's beautiful. And for people who might want to come here to the Slow Coast, I mean, you talked about its proximity to the ocean, the long growing season, it's a lot of little beach towns. How can they find you and your wines, and where can they find you? How can they taste it, and what can they experience?
Well, these days you look on your phone or you look on your computer, and obviously we have a website, and you just look up Lindquist wines or Verdad wines, and it'll direct you to our website. We have a tasting room in the village of Arroyo Grande, which is where we are right now, which is easily accessible, very close to Pismo Beach and very close to San Luis Obispo and very close to northern Santa Barbara County. So it's a good location. And then there's just a lot to do in this area, especially if you like cold Pacific Ocean water and classic funky beach towns. There's Cayucas and Pismo Beach and Grover Beach. There's some fun places here on the Morro Bay. Fun places here on the Central Coast if you want to go to the beach.
So I think that's perfect. Come take a beach holiday, not your warm water, but just a fun time at the beach with these cute towns, and head into the Lindquist Family Wines tasting room to taste some wines. Bob, it's been a real pleasure to have you today on Wine Soundtrack. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Allison.
Let's go drink some wine.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.